We've all been there. We've all witnessed a movie that left us scratching our heads in disbelief. The peculiar thing is, someone at some time for some unexplainable reason thought making the film was a worthwhile idea. What were they thinking? One such movie was the 1934 American black and white exploitation horror film Maniac, which is also known as Sex Maniac. I'm Old Man Kelly and I can't help myself. I need to know the story, the who's, the whens, and the whys. The man who was responsible for this film was Dwain Esper. Dwain Esper was born in 1894 and lived to 1982. He, at one time, worked in a circus sideshow, but built his fortune as a building contractor. Sometime in the 1920s or 30s, he decided to make films. Besides Maniac, he also created such masterpieces as The Sinister Menace, The Seventh Commandment, Narcotic, Modern Motherhood, Marijuana, and How to Undress in Front of Your Husband. He also bought a film made by a church group about the dangers of cannabis called Tell Your Children. He added a little extra footage and turned it into the beloved classic we all know today as Reefer Madness. On top of that, since Todd Browning's masterpiece Freaks was a failure at the box office, he was able to buy the rights from Universal for cheap and found a way to make it profitable. Dwain wasn't like Ed Wood. Ed had a passion for filmmaking. He fancied himself an artist, but well, came up a little short even if he didn't know it himself. Dwain Esper, as far as I can tell, never had any ambition to be an artist. He was a businessman who made films for one reason: profit. He would spend as little as possible to make his films and use his entrepreneurial skills to make it pay. Dwain would make his films under the pretense of being educational or as a moral warning, but were for the most part nothing more than exploitational wonders filled with gratuitous nudity and violence. He's the father of modern exploitation. For instance, his film The Seventh Commandment from 1932, which of course gets its name from the Bible's "Thou shalt not commit adultery," seems like a cautionary tale about sex out of wedlock. But was that really Dwain's intent? Or was it more to have an excuse to show explicit sexual content? We will never know. The film's been lost to time, so we can only guess. But reports from the time seem to indicate that it featured actual footage of childbirth through cesarean section. Joseph I. Breen, the head of the Production Code Administration at the time, had this to say: "The whole play is the most thoroughly vile and disgusting motion picture which the three members of this staff who saw the picture last night have ever seen. It is thoroughly reprehensible in all its details. In addition, it is poorly produced and poorly photographed. The whole thing is very offensive and disgusting." That's an important thing to bring up, that he presented these films at the time of the Hays Code. This code, which existed from 1930 to 1968, prohibited things like profanity, suggestive nudity, graphic or realistic violence, sexual persuasion, and rape. There were a lot of rules. During the time of the Hays Code, you couldn't even show a toilet in a film. So how did Dwain get away with it? Many of his films were written by his wife, Hildagarde Stadie. Hildagarde was still alive at the age of 90 in 1986. In an article in the Los Angeles Times, she said, "There was not a thing in the movie business that we did not have our mitts into. When we decided to make films, I did the writing. Dwain was producer, director, soundman, cameraman, and editor, and sometimes actor. I did most of the ad layouts and drew up the poster ideas. Dwain sold. Boy, could he sell." According to the article, Hildagarde was only 8 when she shilled as a snake charmer for an uncle who sold snake oil from the back of a horse-driven wagon. She was a 21-year-old Time City General Assignment reporter when she met Esper, who then was a motorcycle stuntman at the Motordrome in Venice. The two would be married in 1920. The first film she wrote for Dwain was Narcotic, in which she based on the death of her physician uncle who had been addicted to opium. Dwain made the film for less than $9,000, which was cheap even for 1932. And then he created the Roadshow Attraction Corporation. Dwain would drive across the country with a trunk full of film cans, flyers, and posters. In small towns, he would rent a theater and show his films. The Hays Code was a Hollywood self-policing system. The idea was that a theater wouldn't show a film unless it had the Hays Code approval, but Dwain would rent out theaters himself, so therefore he could show what he wanted. He was outside the Hollywood system. He didn't have to conform to their rules. He would promote his films by hanging up posters that were guaranteed to interest the general public, making sure that adults only was clearly visible. People were often shocked at what they saw. Where Hollywood might hint at nudity, usually stopping before any kind of forbidden body part was visible, Dwain didn't stop there. You want bare breasts? Dwain would give you bare breasts. His film showed sex, drugs, and violence in detail that the mainstream would never do and wouldn't do into the late 1960s. He would show his films as long as they made money. When word got out about the quality of his films, or there were protests, he would just pack up and drive to another town. The Hays office, they hated us. You see, they couldn't stop us, and that made them awful mad. They didn't like anything we were doing. The only reason we liked it so well is because it was making money for us. As I went through all the newspapers, I saw reviews like this. Wednesday and Thursday, Dwain Esper presents Narcotic, a true biography that leaves nothing to the imagination, a sensation in screen thrills, authentic disclosure of the sex-enticing effects of dope upon men and women. I wondered if Dwain would pay newspaper publishers a few dollars to include a small positive review of his films. Now I noticed that Dwain had some problems when it came to paying his actors. But it's okay if they sued him, because Dwain was famous for his own lawsuits. One of the strangest Esper stories was for his one reel film, How to Undress in Front of Your Husband, a 14-minute comedy that doesn't actually show any nudity. It was made purely as a joke. The dark-haired woman in the film was Elaine Barry, better known as Elaine Barry Barrymore, wife of the American star of stage, screen, and radio, John Barrymore. John was one of the biggest actors of the day, and also the brother of Lionel and Ethel Barrymore, the father of John Drew Barrymore, and the grandfather of actress Drew Barrymore. Anyway, Elaine was his fourth wife. The story goes that Elaine had fallen in love with Barrymore when she was 16 after seeing the classic 1931 film Svengali. A few years later, when she was a sophomore at Hunter College, she pretended to be doing a celebrity story for a class assignment to get into a hospital room in which she was staying. And that led to a marriage. Elaine was 21 and John 55. Their marriage was a rocky one right from the start, and during one of their breakups or divorces, she agreed to be in the short film. Soon after, she and John got back together and he tried to stop the film from being released. Of course, she was billed as Elaine Barry Barrymore. The newly found bliss of John Barrymore and Elaine Barry, who are planning to get married again, was marred today by a court fight. Producer Dwain Esper went to court to defend the use of the title How to Undress in Front of Your Husband, a one-reel skit starring Miss Barry. The Barrymores, Esper said, can like the picture or lump it, but Elaine was paid something in 4 figures for one day's disrobing in front of the camera to make the picture, and it's going to be released within a week, all the complaints notwithstanding. As for defending the title, another producer named E.K. Nadel was suing Dwain, saying that he had exclusive rights to the name How to Undress in Front of Your Husband, which was a skit in his stage act. Dwain, I assume, must have loved all the publicity, and in the end it all worked out for the producer.
Style, charm, and distinction come from neither beauty nor money, nor a combination of the two. They are the simple result of aesthetic sense, cultivated taste, and a persistence in maintaining the lovely little tricks that every girl practices on her first sweetheart.
As for Maniac, while it's not a very good film, I think in some ways it's possible to defend. Gary J. Savella, in his book Guilty Pleasures of the Horror Film, did so. He wrote, "Consciously or not, Dwain Esper's Maniac is a mockery of Hollywood, refusing to mimic its veneer of sophistication and its idea of artistry, delivering the same sex, violence, and intrigue in slop buckets rather than pearly teacups." His wife Hildagarde wrote this as a loose adaptation of the 1843 Edgar Allan Poe story, The Black Cat. It was made for an estimated budget of $7,500 and is only 51 minutes long. Upon its initial release, it was a box office disappointment, partially because of the trailer. It looked just like another mad scientist film, which were very popular at the time.
It's horrible, I tell you. Working on the dead. Trying to bring back life. It's not natural. You with your weird ideas. Haven't I stayed here and nursed dying dogs? Yeah. And even that miserable cat? Agony! I can't stand this torture!
Esper learned a lesson. In the future, he made sure all his trailers showed people just what kind of film they were going to see, full of sex and violence. Later, he would re-release the film as Sex Maniac, and with that title, it did a lot better. In the film, many times there are shots of the devil superimposed over the action. These were taken from the 1922 Danish-Swedish silent film Hexen. The film actually features two real actors. Buckley, the troubled man who is made mentally unstable by adrenaline, is played by Ted Edwards.
Stealing through my body, creeping through my veins, pouring in my blood. Oh, there's the fire in my brain.
Ted lived from 1884 to 1945. He was an English-born American film actor of the silent era who appeared in 2 Charlie Chaplin comedy shorts. His career lasted from 1914 to 1936, and he has 52 acting credits, but this is his best-known film. The mad scientist, Dr. Meyer Schultz, is played by Horace B. Carpenter. Horace lived from 1875 to 1945 and was an actor, film director, and screenwriter. He appeared in more than 330 films between 1914 and 1946.
You know my powers. You have worked with me. You have faith in me. Here, take this. Take it and take your life, and I will give it back to you.
He directed 15 films between 1925 and 1934, and also appeared in Esper's 1932 film, The Seventh Commandment. Why was he in this film? I can only guess, but I think it was one day's work for a decent paycheck. The star of the film was Bill Woods, who plays Don Maxwell. Besides a couple of uncredited parts, this is Bill's only real acting credit, and I don't know anything about him, not even when he was born or when he died.
Meyer Schultz would be missed. Maxwell never would.
The only other actor I'll mention is Phyllis Diller, who plays Mrs. Buckley. And I only mention her to point out that this is not the stand-up comedian, actress, author, musician, and visual artist Phyllis Diller. So what is Maniac? We begin with a foreword that would make George Lucas jealous. The brain, in and of its physical self, does not think any more than a musical instrument can give forth melody without the touch of the musician's hand. The brain is indeed the instrument of thinking, but the mind is the beautiful player that makes it give forth the beautiful harmony of thought. And then it goes on and on. Forewords like this were popular on these types of films to give the illusion of being educational or informative. We open in a laboratory with the gray-haired Dr. Meyer-Schultz and his assistant Don Maxwell. Meyer-Schultz is a mad scientist who is experimenting on reviving the dead.
Tonight, my dear Maxwell, I'm ready to try my experiment on a human.
Don, well, he's a former vaudeville performer who specialized in impersonations. The doctor wants to send Don to the morgue to get a body of a recently dead woman who committed suicide by inhaling gas. Don doesn't like the idea.
It's horrible, I tell you. Working on the dead. Trying to bring back life. It's not natural.
Once a ham, always a ham.
They both go to the morgue, and the doctor attempts to revive her right there, but soon they take her back to the lab. The police are soon on the case.
There must have been a very strong resemblance.
Yeah, he was a dead image of him. And talk like him, too.
But the doctor, who thinks he's going to bring the girl back to life, has another experiment on his mind. A heart replacement. Don decides to visit the undertaker to get a body, but when he sees cats fighting, he gets scared off, so he returns empty-handed to the lab, and Dr. Meyer-Schultz is angry.
Oh, you fool! You have failed me in the greatest moment of my life!
But then the doctor has an idea. Don will be the subject of the experiment. Rather than shooting Don himself, he gives Don the gun to commit suicide.
Take it and take your life, and I will give it back to you. My living heart shall beat in your body.
That is not a very bright idea, as Don, in a panic, shoots and kills the doctor. And then we're back to reading. Don is horrified as to what he has done and begins to descend into madness.
Isn't the spark that moves the maggot the self-same spark that moves the man? Preserving that spark in the individual is not important. What we do with the spark while we have it is important.
But then he remembers that he's an impersonator, and why not use his skills to transform himself into the doctor? And then more reading. We cut to Don as Dr. Meyer-Schultz examining Mr. Buckley while his wife looks on. He plans to inject him with water, which he believes to be harmless, just to make it look like he's doing something. But accidentally he gives him adrenaline, and that has some bad effects on Buckley.
Stealing through my body, creeping through my veins.
Mrs. Buckley isn't happy, and while all this is going on, the dead girl stolen from the morgue comes to life as sort of a zombie. Hey, it's just one of those days. Buckley carries away Zombie Girl, and Mrs. Buckley discovers the body of the real doctor. The fake doctor convinces Mrs. Buckley that the dead man was his assistant, and he plans on bringing him back to life.
Why didn't you call the police?
No, not the police. I wanted to bring him back to life. I wanted to experiment on him.
Oddly, Mrs. Buckley sees this as an opportunity.
When you bring your assistant back to life, his mind will do as you direct. You can do the same to Buckley. Then he will do as I direct.
And as Mr. Buckley carries away the girl, her breasts are revealed. Hey, this is 1934, what are you doing? I believe we're supposed to get the idea that crazed Mr. Buckley rapes Zombie Girl. And then the fake doctor meets a strange man who breeds cats.
Oh, howdy, Doc. Say, a couple of my cats got away. You seen them anywhere?
Of course not. What would I want with your cats?
Oh, well, I didn't know. I I thought maybe, you might use them for, some experiments or something.
Afraid that the police are coming, he takes the real doctor to the basement to brick up his body behind a wall. Oddly, in the middle of the process, he chases and grabs a black cat and, in a very disturbing scene, pops out one of the cat's eyes and eats it. And then we're treated to more reading. And as he finishes bricking up the doctor, the cat jumps in the hole. After some strange talk by the cat breeder,
the rats eat the cats eat the rats, and I get the skins.
The film suddenly cuts to a very gratuitous scene of a bunch of young women in an apartment prancing around in their underwear. And from the sound of their voices, I wonder if helium was being pumped in.
Sure, in his day, men were men. But today, they're too scared to be anything but honest. La cucaracha, la cockroacha.
In an unexpected twist, we find out that one of the ladies was married to Don Maxwell, but the couple is now separated. When reading in the newspaper that Don is being sought because he inherited a large amount of money, she goes out looking for him. And then more reading. We then have a woman, I assume a patient, at the doctor's office, and her breast is revealed. This sight causes Don to fantasize about his real self kissing the woman, and that leads to a final breakdown.
It was in Mrs. Buckley's eyes when she wanted to murder her husband. Alice had the gleam in her eye when she wanted to find me. She'd murder me. That's what she wants to do. I must get rid of her.
Everyone's against him, he figures, even his wife. He comes up with a plan to get rid of both of them, Mrs. Buckley and his wife. He turns them against each other before locking them in the basement, and they begin to fight. The cat-breeding neighbor sees what's going on and he calls the police. In the basement, the cat is heard behind the wall and it gives it all away. More reading.
I showed them Dr. Myers. A real impersonation.
Yes, this film is filled with absurd camera angles, poor lighting, and bad editing. The acting is either poor, well beyond amateurish, or overacted to the point that one wants to give the actor a glass of beer to wash down all the scenery he is chewing. Yet I will defend it. We live in a world where most filmmakers have been to film school to learn their craft, and they have more than 100 years of quality filmmaking to use as a guide. And anyone with a cell phone can shoot video in much better quality on a limited budget than ever has been possible before. Even the lowest budget films that are made outside the Hollywood system are still slick and have a professional look, even if most are, to me, well, boring. That's why a film like Maniac has a certain charm. It was made simply and cheaply by someone who didn't know the art of filmmaking, and probably didn't care. And that's beautiful.
That's sort of queer, I'd say. There's lots of queer goings on up there. Why, they even brought a dead dog back to life once.
Well, that sounds very remarkable to me.
It may be, but to my notion, those that monkeys with what they got no business to gets queer sooner or later.
Maybe you're right.
I know I am.
It's like giving a 5-year-old a box of crayons and a piece of paper and seeing what wonderful art they can create. And this is true art. It's a creative innocence that's washed away as soon as they go to art school. Give a man a camera who doesn't know the rule of thirds, the 180 rule, positive and negative space, the golden ratio, when to use a close-up, the 3-act structure, or any of the basic proper filmmaking techniques, and maybe, just maybe, he will give you something unexpected, and dare I say, something unique? Something beyond predictable linear narratives? Yes, I find beauty in Maniac's ugliness, and the truth is, Esper was only trying to give the public what they wanted, but without all the pretense of art that Hollywood has tried for over 100 years to convince us they are interested in. Even now, I feel a film such as Maniac is refreshing after the last 15 years of being bombarded by $250 million superhero films. But of course, there's always room for improvement. Here are my thoughts. I can only guess why Dwain decided to interrupt his film with text crawls. It's most likely to trick the public into thinking he was doing a public service, to mask the exploitative nature of his films under the guise of being educational. While this is understandable, and a small amount might be acceptable, Dwain expects his audience to read way too much. It's never a good idea to make your audience read. Show, don't tell, they say. And while I find amateur acting charming, there is a limit. The guy in the middle there, he looks totally uncomfortable, and he might be drunk.
I wouldn't swear to anything now after being secured to the coroner.
I really don't think the story's a bad one, but it could use some work, so let's jump into how would Old Man Kelly improve this film? Going back to what I just said, I would eliminate all the text crawls. I've seen the first Star Wars film, A New Hope, dozens of times, and it wasn't until recently I actually read the opening text crawl. What might have worked better is have the police bring in an expert, and he could have answered all their questions, and in that way get the same information across without all the reading. I would also have had a scene or two with the girls from the apartment in a little earlier. It seems to come as a surprise that the blonde girl was married to Don. Maybe we could have had a scene earlier where he approaches her about getting back together and she refuses. Something along those lines. I think the later scene would have seemed more natural and wouldn't have been so gratuitous. Not that there's anything wrong with being gratuitous. And how about Mr. and Mrs. Buckley? As far as Mrs. Buckley, she went from almost hysterics over her husband going crazy after the injection to moments later wanting him to be turned into a mindless zombie. I need to know what got them to this point. Maybe a few moments of their home life would have helped. And I would have followed up on Mr. Buckley and his zombie bride. Perhaps he could have been caught or killed by police, and that would have led him to the laboratory. And then you wouldn't have needed that creepy cat guy. Yes, I would cut the cat breeder stuff. I get that Dwain used animals as a visual representation of the character's state of mind, but still, I don't need to see animals fighting. I read that Dwain caught strays and got them to fight, which to me is really disturbing. And while I know that the Edgar Allan Poe short story The Black Cat has a scene in which the main character gouges out the eye of a cat, it might have made more sense there, but I really didn't need to see it in this film. And now how about something good or why should I watch this movie? It's a dark, twisted film, almost like a David Lynch nightmare. It's surreal, like a bad dream. Even as the film opens and the titles appear on the screen, with Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony playing, strange shadowy faces appear behind the credits. What was Dwain thinking? It successfully takes us down a journey of a character descending into madness. He doesn't hide behind the fake curtain of good taste and outright presents forbidden topics such as necrophilia, murder, reanimation, nudity, and animal abuse. And while many people were making exploitation films such as this at the time, not too many survive. In fact, only 3 of Dwain's directorial films survive. And so for that, it has an historical place in film history. So that alone makes it worth seeing. And it's less than an hour, so there's that. And the overacting, well, that's worth the price of admission alone.
My other soul. My supreme.